Well, the House is resumed. Before the dinner break, we were on the third reading of the Maritime Crimes Amendment Bill. The Honourable Andrew Little was speaking, and he has 4 minutes and 30 seconds remaining to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it is a great pleasure to return to the House to continue, hopefully where I left off. Madam Speaker, as I was saying before we were interrupted, this bill is important because it allows us now to ratify international treaties that were signed in 2005, and the obvious circumstances of the growing incidence of terrorism on the high seas. So we saw the acts of piracy, usually off the coast of Somalia, but in other parts of the world as well. And the world community got together and said we have to have better protection and better laws to do this. So in 2005, the relevant international treaties were signed. And for some mysterious reason, it has taken us this long to pass the legislation that enables us to ratify that treaty so that we can take the remedial measures and the active measures that provides protection to those in or near New Zealand waters that they need against terrorism. And as I said before the dinner break, one of the interesting aspects of this legislation is that it will enable New Zealand effectively to extend its jurisdiction beyond the 12-mile limit and have a law that applies for the protection of people on vessels, or at least use the law to stretch out to people with a nefarious intent who are motoring their way through the waters that we don't presently have territorial jurisdiction over. So it has that important aspect to it. What it allows New Zealand to do is to extend its jurisdiction beyond those outer limits, providing that there is an offence that is committed against or on board a New Zealand ship or on a fixed platform like a drilling rig. It could be some of the production vessels that are sitting off the coast of Taranaki at the moment, and where the alleged offender is a New Zealand citizen or a New Zealand resident or a stateless person, but who has a plan to act improperly towards New Zealanders and their interests. So that's an important thing that ought to be brought on this final occasion that this bill passes through the House to the attention of the House. As I said, the bill implements the obligations that we've already signed up to in the Rome Convention, the 2005 Protocol to the Rome Convention for the Suppression of Unlawful Acts against the Safety of Maritime Navigation. Don't ask what the anagram for that one is, Madam Speaker, because that will be horrifying. The other thing that I think is important to it is that, because it was one of the fears expressed by many people, is that this type of counter-terrorism protection could be used to suppress legitimate, justified protest activity. And on this side of the House, we would not pass a piece of legislation that allowed that to happen. Fortunately, as this bill has passed through all stages of the House, there has been a consensus between members of the House that also a protection that ought properly to appear in this bill, and it does very much so, to ensure that someone undertaking a legitimate protest activity that will be noticeable, that will be visible, may be seen by some as aggressive, is not captured by the crimes and offences spelled out in this piece of legislation. And it is, of course, the case that this bill provides offences not just in relation to the doing of particular acts, the carrying of biological, chemical or nuclear weapons at sea, or using a vessel to cause harm, but actually merely threatening to do those things is an offence under the Act, and we want those things to be caught because that will help the enforcement agencies to do that. And of course, the other thing it allows is the authorities to go after fugitives who have committed offences against the particular convention, the Rome Convention I talked about. All those things are covered by the legislation as well. This is important legislation, Madam Speaker. It allows New Zealand to hold its head up high in the community of nations that are serious about counter-terrorism measures on land, but also under this bill at sea.
I call the Honourable Todd McLean.